Welcome to this edition of Oxford Empowered. I'm Brenda Pierce, and I'm here to empower you with amazing guests and stories and people that you need to know or may already know, like today's special guest, Ruta Lee. And I am really happy to have her here today. Ruta was a Montreal-born Canadian from Lithuanian descent who traveled all the way down to the United States and became famous. And so Ruta Lee is with us. I'm so inspired to have you here today, Ruta. It is marvelous because you've been in so many of our world of TV and movies through the years. It's a pleasure to have you here on Oxford Empowered.
Well, Brenda, I am so delighted to be one of your many wonderful guests. And you offer inspiration and ideas and novel thinking to an awful lot of people, and I'm so happy to be part of it, and maybe I will learn something today as well.
Well, Ruta, it is amazing because your career has spanned from when you were a little girl dancing on the stage all the way to George Burns and Gracie Allen's show, and then into film and stage, TV, and over 2,000 different shows. And it is wonderful to have you share some of this knowledge.
Thank you. It was a long haul from Montreal to Hollywood, but my mother, God bless her, who was a darling little farm girl from a poor family in Lithuania, I mean, she carried her shoes to church across the streams and fields on Sundays because those shoes had to be passed down to the next daughter and the next daughter. So we're talking about really homespun folk who came to the United States via Canada. Canada opened its doors when the United States quotas had already been closed, and my father had to sign up for a year of working in the wheat fields in Saskatchewan, and he saved enough money to bring my mother over. Fortunately, I was born in Canada a lot of years ago now, but what a pleasant journey it's been. And then eventually, because my mom, who knew nothing about the theater and showbiz, see what happens when we deal here. Oh, dear, 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 dear. I don't know how to turn it off. There we go. I'm so sorry. Anyway, I was saying that my mother, who was this peasant girl and knew absolutely nothing about show business and the theater and New York and how close it was to Montreal, did nevertheless see movies. And she fell in love, like the world did, with Shirley Temple. And she would ponder and say, you know, my daughter can do that. And she thought I was Lithuania's answer to Shirley Temple. And therefore, when the time was appropriate, and it was rather miraculous because we got a visa to come to the United States at a time when all the visas were being given to displaced persons after the war, you know, in 47 and 48 and 49. And we came to California, and with my darling mother's persistence in finding a way, somehow I wound up in television and in movies, and all I can do is say, thank you, Mama Mary, and above all, thank you, God, for providing everything.
What a gift and what a story, and what the possibility of the American dream you fulfill in so many ways. It's just priceless to know that you have these Canadian roots, and you know where London is, you know where Woodstock is. And
I surely do. I was telling your producer, John, that I used to spend my summers on my Aunt Malvina's little farm in Colborne, Ontario. And she had an apple orchard, and they had animals, and we overlooked Lake Ontario. And it was a glorious way to spend the summer. And my mother would put me on the train and send me off to Colborne every year. So we used to, I remember my uncle would pick cherries that we had on the tree, and we'd put them in baskets, and we'd go sell cherries off the truck. And it was an amazing experience in merchandising, and one that I've never forgotten.
Yes, yes. And it just probably seems like a snap ago when that was actually the way you lived your life, and all this has transpired since then. So it's my turn to have a phone interrupt us. Let me just scoot away. Tell us a little bit about your story in terms of the Gracie Allen and George Burns show while I go shut that off.
You bet, darling. I was working all through high school. I was fortunate enough to be able to go to Hollywood High, where so many celebrities kind of had their formative years. And I was working in little theater. It's a wonder that I ever graduated, because after school, I'd go to rehearsal and then do a show and maybe rehearse after the show and then get up in the morning and go to school. But one of the associate producers in the little theater, the gallery stage where I was working in musicals, sort of took note of me a little. And he was also the associate producer on Burns and Allen. Therefore, he suggested me to come in and play the role of Sandy. And Sandy happened to be the name of their daughter. So I sort of felt a kinship and a relationship with them. And they were very, very sweet to me. And that was my very first show. And it was what got me my Screen Actors Guild card. You know, you had to be hired by somebody. And it was quite an amazing experience. And the nice part, Brenda, is that Gracie Allen lived, well, quite some time after I did the show, but George lasted a very long time. I think he was, 102 or something when he died. And God bless him, he would come to the Thalian events. And the Thalians is the charity that Debbie Reynolds and I headed up as Mother Superiors for a lot of years. And he would come every year and sit at my table. And I was so honored. And he would, chew on his cigar because you couldn't smoke in the ballroom. But he'd grunt and say, good girl, good girl. Happy that I was doing things that I should be doing, not just for myself in the business, but aiding those who couldn't help themselves the best way I knew how. So it was nice to have him as a friend. Very, very nice.
That is amazing. And the Thalian group that you headed up with Debbie Reynolds is all about mental health and wellness. Could you tell us a little bit about this give back that you've created?
Oh, absolutely. Well, to start with, a group of young Hollywood people and people in allied fields, not just actors, but producers, writers, directors, costumers, whatever. A young group of people would get together and have parties and sing around the piano, and they'd say, we do this, and what we should do is put something together and sell tickets and make a little money for a charity. They got tired, this young group, of being called hard-drinking, pot-smoking asses that contributed nothing to the world. And they sent out Jane Mansfield and Mamie Van Doren. Now talk about bazooms. Holy mackerel. They covered the market. And they were darling girls, and they sent them out to find a good charity to give our money to. And they came back to the next meeting and said, well, all the good diseases have been taken. But they found a wonderful doctor who was dealing with emotionally disturbed children. And he described those children as rotting apples in a barrel that can infect not just the barrel, but the entire community. And if they weren't fixed, and this was his task. And so we took on the plight of emotionally disturbed children. And 18 years later, we opened the doors to the first building at the big Cedar Sinai complex here. And it was the Thalians Mental Health Center. And we dealt not just with children, we went from pediatric all the way through geriatric in research and healing. And it was very exciting to think that this group of young Hollywood people were able to shine that great big Hollywood spotlight, a Klieg-like, into the dark abyss known as mental illness, thereby perhaps bringing those people into the light of healing. And I was very, very proud of what we did. And then some 50 years later, we really rediscovered something that we should have dealt with right from the beginning, and that is the plight of the returning veterans. Those beautiful young people that we as Americans or Canadians or the Brits send all over the world, and they are willing to put their lives on the line for us wherever they're sent into dangerous areas. And then they come back, and sometimes they fall through the cracks because the Veterans Administrations don't handle something, or somehow they get lost. So we Thalians joined up with Operation Mend at UCLA in the Ronald Reagan building. And Operation Mend deals with healing the broken and fractured bodies. And we Thalians are dealing with the broken and fractured mind of these returning young people. And I'm so proud of what we do. Now, of course, we did all of this from the beginning by doing great, big, huge extravaganza shows, all-star shows, honoring a person each year that not only dazzled us on the screen, big or small, or the stage with their performances, but who also dazzled us with their performances philanthropically. And we honored everybody from Frank Sinatra through Lucille Ball, through Whoopi Goldberg, through everybody in the world we dealt with. And big stars would come in and do shows for them, etc. And we raised an awful lot of money, millions and millions and millions of dollars, all for mental health. And of course, COVID has put a great big clamp on everything that we could do because you couldn't do very much. But Lord knows there are still good people out there in this world. And to everybody that has ever given me 5 cents, $5, $500,000, I would say from the stage, please consider your ass kissed, which, by the way, just happens to be the title of my book. And I mean it from the bottom of my heart to anybody that has ever turned the television on because I was going to be on a channel, or paid to buy a movie ticket, or paid to come see me in the theater. Consider your darling asses kissed. Mwah.
Which is wonderful. It's amazing how, the seeds were planted by a group of you, and how many thousands, if not millions of lives you've touched through the Thalian Society and all Operation Mend, and now your memoirs. I'm sure that your memoirs, they're just launched now, or are they available on Amazon?
They're available, yes, they're available on Amazon. They're available at Barnes and Noble. But I, of course, suggest that you go to your local bookstore and ask for them to order it, because everybody needs the business. The smaller stores, they have suffered so through all of this. And when it comes to the Thalians and what we've done, Brenda, I've got to tell you, there is such great satisfaction in what happens. And sometimes Debbie and I, God rest her soul, we're talking about you, girl. We would say, oh, I'm so tired of this. And trying to put a show together year after year after year was not the easiest thing in the world. It took almost a year to get it all together because you never knew who your honoree would be, whether they would say yes or no. But it was worth all the effort and the agony and the pain, because we'd be sitting in a restaurant somewhere, or at a grocery store, or at a gas station, and somebody would walk up and say, you have no idea of how your Thalians saved my kid's life, or my mother's life, or somebody's, because we had this wonderful clinic able to do so much for so many. So that was, I think, our maker's way of tapping us on the shoulder and saying, good job, girls, good job.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So beautiful. And you also had this experience of actually dealing with Khrushchev, the communist dictator. Tell us about that story and how that resulted.
Well, it's a fabulous story, I must say. And either blessings or pure luck would have it, I had been years trying to get my grandmother, who had been deported to Siberia along with my grandfather. My grandfather's legs were frozen on that cattle car that they were being deported on, much like the same cattle cars that the Jews were sent to Auschwitz and everywhere with. And the same thing was happening under Stalin, a different dictator and a different despot. And why were they deported? My God, they were little farm folk. They were not the intelligentsia, not the bright lights, the thinkers, you know, and the people that people followed. They were just poor little farm folk. But they were shipped off to Siberia. I presume, nobody could ever explain it to me when I was there. I would presume that it was during the repatriation when they were sending all kinds of Russians to Poland, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, trying to change the mix of people, you know. And my grandfather's legs were frozen when he was taken off at one of the stops. When they took his boots off, the flesh came off with him, gangrene had set in. And he died, and my grandmother didn't even know because she was forced to continue on to Siberia, where she lived for many years. How she survived, I don't know, other than thanks to the Red Cross, my mother was able to locate her in Siberia. And we started sending packages. And those packages, 40 pounds, that's all it was allowed. Excuse me. They included some old clothes, of course, and a pound of coffee and a pound of tea and a pound of sugar and a pound of lard, whatever made up the 40 pounds. And they survived. She survived on this by sharing with everybody for many years. And then eventually this little old woman hitchhiked across Siberia to find other members of her family. Can you imagine? In her 90s, she did this. And then they were permitted after the 15 years to either stay in Siberia, where they had already, most people felled logs and built little huts to live in, or they could return to Lithuania. Of course, they chose to go home to Lithuania. Their property, of course, was gone. That little farm that they had was now, God knows, owned by whom. And so my aunt took my grandmother in, and they lived in a little hut. And again, we were sending them packages that helped them to survive. And I came home from the studio one day, and my mother was in a spate of tears saying, "I've got a letter from your aunt. She's written for your grandmother," because my grandmother never went to school. She never learned to read or write. And she was dying, and she was sending her thank yous. She was told by the doctor that she was going to die shortly. And of course, it took anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks for a letter to come, so God only knows if she was alive. I proceeded to starting to call the embassy in Washington to see if I could get through to somebody to allow me to go to Lithuania, where I would either go to her cemetery site or I would find her. And no matter who I talked to, from the window washer to the gardener to the upstairs maid, it was niet, 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 niet. No, 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 no. I went out with friends that night, and the more wine they poured, the more obvious it became that I should do something quite outrageous, and that is pick up the phone and call Khrushchev. And in those days, Brenda, you're probably too young to remember this, but we used to be able to make person-to-person calls. You paid twice as much if the call went through, but you didn't pay if it didn't go through. So I risked making a person-to-person call to the Soviet Union, and I asked to speak to Nikita Khrushchev, the Kremlin, Moscow, USSR. And that operator, rotten person, said, "How do you spell Khrushchev?" Well, who the hell knows how to spell Khrushchev? Anyway, it was many, many hours of back and forth and back and forth. And by now the wine is wearing off, and I'm beginning to kind of sober up a little bit, and I'm not sure that this is a good idea. And finally, a call comes through, and the Russian operator says, Mr. Khrushchev not speak it English. You speak it with his interpreter. And I said, yes, because I remembered that the very handsome young man that traveled with Khrushchev was able to take his very gruff language and change it out to make it palatable to our Victorian ears here in the Americas. And so I spoke to him and he said, oh, Miss Lee, it's a pleasure to speak to you. We know all about you here. We see your movies. And what can I do for you? And I said, I'll tell you what you can do for me. I want papers to be able to come to see if I can find my grandmother if she's alive. And not only do I want to come to Lithuania, but I want to take my mother and father with me. And the State Department had said to me, don't take your parents because they could be detained as Soviet citizens. You know, but we're not going to go to war over this. And you have to remember that Lithuania, nobody went to unless you were a very high party official. Then maybe they would let you into one of those satellite countries. And amazingly enough, he said, present yourself again in 30 minutes to the Soviet embassy in Washington. And I thought, oh, I'm getting pushed around again. But amazingly enough, those hotlines must have flashed between Moscow and the embassy in Washington, because this time when I called back, I was connected immediately to the first secretary. And the first secretary was Lithuanian. And I spoke fluently, well, fairly fluently with him. And long story, just a little bit shorter. In 48 hours, my papers were signed, sealed, and delivered. And I was on a Pan Am flight to Moscow, then doubling back to Lithuania, because you had to go in to the Soviet Union through one of the gate cities. And Moscow and Leningrad were the two great gate cities. And we eventually found my grandmother in a hospital where she had been miraculously moved by ambulance all the way across Lithuania when they knew the Americans were coming. And again, long story short, 6 months after that, I had the papers to come back to the Soviet Union, to Lithuania, and collect my grandmother, go out through Moscow, get all the papers signed, sealed, and delivered. And the next thing I knew, we were on our way to London and to America. And when my sweet little 90-something-year-old grandmother got off, we didn't have jetways in those days. This is 1964. She went down the stairs on the steps in her little clothes that I had sent her to be buried in, but she was traveling in with her babushka and one of my sweaters. She stepped down off the stairs, dropped to her knees on the ground, kissed the ground, threw her arms up in the air and said, "Ačiū Dieve, hello America, thank you God, hello America." Oh, that brings me to tears every time I think about it. And I think how blessed we as Canadians and as Americans are to have the freedoms that we have, to have the kind of country that we have. We have been so blessed, and sometimes I almost want to take some heads and hit them against the wall and say, wake up to how blessed you are and worship your God and the country that he gave you.
What an amazing story. Amazing. And it just, the hairs on the back of my neck just stand, you know, and you retelling that, and how wonderful for your grandmother and for your family, and peace of mind and heart and body and spirit. So empowering. I just love you, and thank you for sharing that. So how long was your grandmother able to stay with you and enjoy America?
If I ever get through to heaven, I have a bone to pick with God, and that is that he only gave her 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days. Wow. And I think she died out of the excitement of one of her daughters that I got permission to get out of the Soviet Union. And they were very good to me. The communist regime somehow I think knew that the press was behind me in many ways. And so they wanted to appear as the shining stars, you know, and they let me have a few people. I eventually was able to get out my goddaughter. I call her that now because she's a second cousin to me, but they only let her out when she was 18, and she now is here in the United States and married an ex-Marine and teaches school, and she's my pride and joy. And so I'm very, very grateful that so many people helped me along the way. And I've got to tell you that the letters, the Johnny Carson show followed this like the perils of Pauline. And Johnny even had my grandmother on when they brought the show out to Hollywood, you know, from New York. And the sweet letters and the prayers and the little gifts that came for my grandmother from all over the Americas, Canada, and United States. It was just amazing. And I just think that we are the most generous, loving people on the face of this earth. And I sort of feel like just tell your story to anybody in the Americas and you will get support. You know, if it's, we're generous, we are generous, and I'm grateful for that.
Well, we are. And despite the times that we're living in right now, your story is just so empowering and such a joy to hear you telling these stories and uplifting for us, because we need that upliftment right now. We really do.
We do. It proved a point to me that I have never forgotten. And that is that when you have a mission, when you have a thought and a goal in mind and in heart, don't be afraid to do the impossible. Don't be afraid to take that step forward. Don't be afraid of making a fool of yourself. Just go for it, you know, and if it's meant to be, it will happen. So it proved a point to me. So I urge everybody that has some kind of a dream, find a way to take those steps forward, even if you have to slog through mud to do it.
Very good, very good, very inspiring. And I just want to take a step back a little bit to your career. You've done so many amazing, amazing films, like Seven Brides for Seven Brothers is
my first job.
Was it really? Wow.
My first movie, yes. And therefore my favorite always.
Absolutely. From your whole extensive career, which reads like a who's who of Hollywood's greats and so many memorable events, what one event really strikes you as hilarious and funny in your mind?
Oh, there have been so many. But again, I think that the serendipity that goes along with anybody in show business who wants a career, so much depends on luck. You can have all the talent in the world, and if that luck doesn't come along to let you exhibit some of that talent, you know, you never know what's going to happen. So I really kind of send up a prayer all the time for everybody who wants to accomplish something and is struggling in the process. One of the most satisfying things to me is that when I was in high school and I got a job working at Grauman's Chinese Theater in the summer. Now, Grauman's Chinese, of course, is world famous. Hand and footprints of all the stars are in their courtyard. And I was an usherette. Now, most people don't even know what in hell an usherette was. But in those days, an usher or an usherette had a flashlight at the top of the aisle and would see you down to the seat of your choice. And it was wonderful because I was working at Grauman's Chinese in my lovely little Chinese tunic and flashlight. And I could stand at the top of the aisle and watch those movie queens, Betty Grable, Mitzi Gaynor, all those fabulous ladies, Ethel Merman, you know, in the musicals, and think, oh, dear God, please let me do that sometime. Let me do that. Let me do that when I grow up. Let me do that. Well, I was doing fine, but I got promoted to Candy Girl. Now I have to explain that math has never been my long suit. I failed math. I was the worst at math. But I could deal with the candy counter because everything was in increments of 10 cents, 15 cents, 25 cents, 50 cents. I could deal with that. I could make change and everything was good. And I was fine there. And then one night, the cashier in the box office got sick. Hang on, now my turn to hang on. Can't talk now, talk to you later. And I got promoted to cashier and I said, oh, I can't do this. I don't know how to make change. And they said, don't worry about it. You punch in 2 tickets at $1.98 and then put in $5 for the bill that they give you and it'll make the right change. And so I tried, but let's put it this way. The machine was wrong and I gave away $40. We were $40 short that night.
Oh no.
I got fired. And I went to the boss and I said, I didn't steal the money. I didn't do it. I'm just stupid and I don't know how to do it. And you'll be sorry. One of these days, my hand and footprints will be here. You'll see, you'll see. Fade out, fade in. Many years later, where is my star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame? In front of the friggin' box office. Now, is that God working in mysterious ways or what? So I had my comeuppance and what a lovely, lovely story and fun that is to tell.
What a wonderful and amazing show we've had today with Ruta Lee. Thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being with us today. And remember always that you are loved and you are loved. You are blessed and you are a blessing. So until next time, remember to stay empowered and be blessed. Bye for now.